Hello, everybody. Welcome to this episode of Mind the Gap, Making Education Work Across the Globe with me, Tom Sherrington, and Emma Turner. Hello, Emma.
Hello.
And we are delighted, absolutely thrilled and honoured to have as our guest today, the mighty Tom Bennett. Hello, Tom.
It's my honour, Tom. Good to see you. We're like the two Ronnies here.
Yeah, I know, it's crazy. The sort of the analogies, I can see it. And Emma's surrounded by Toms. It's a scary thing. But we made a list of people we want to talk to ages ago, and we've been doing this a while, and it's like we have to get Tom Bennett on, but I think we're almost a bit too scared to invite you. No, honestly, it's just we almost like to pluck up the courage to ask you, because you have this sort of aura.
That's a great comeback. I love that. Yes, absolutely.
Good save, Sherrington. Good save.
No, I know. But it's true. I mean, I did an interview with you when your Running the Room book came out a year or so ago, and it's so interesting to talk to you about that. But so we are going to discuss that with you. But first, I want to talk to you a bit about ResearchEd, because it's coming back, isn't it? So it's coming back.
It never went away.
It already is. Where are we with ResearchEd?
Well, it never really went away. It was just slumbering beneath the ocean like the great Cthulhu, waiting to rise again and consume the earth. Sorry, that went a bit dark there. I mean, ResearchEd is, it's always been a bit of a concept. It's an idea. It's a dream. It's a candle in the wind. It doesn't really exist. But then before anything exists, it's an idea, like a hand grenade. And ResearchEd, we don't have any staff. And we don't have any money. And we don't have any premises or anything like that. What we've got is a lot of people bound together by the belief that it's quite useful to volunteer and promote evidence-informed education. So we were primarily a conference-based organisation. And, obviously that went up the spout come COVID, as did many other things. And then Helena and I were talking to Matt Hood, and we had the idea of putting together ResearchEd Home. So we did a series of 45-minute, 1-hour sessions, which went crazy. I mean, we've had hundreds of thousands of views for those sessions. We did it for about 80 days. And it's basically free CPD, and it's still available. And then the minute we got a sniff that we might be able to do conferences again, we started to plan. So we've had a few virtual conferences during lockdown, and they went really well. And people, I think, really appreciated them because the hunger's still there. But even I wasn't sure if people would want to come back to the ResearchEd idea after about 13 months. And I put a tweet out saying, listen, I think we're going to do this again. And people just went nuts for it. So we sold all of our tickets for the ResearchEd conference in September in about 9 days.
Wow.
It normally takes about 3 months to do that, but people just went, I felt like Justin Bieber. I felt like some kind of K-pop sensation. And there's obviously an appetite there. And it's still an act of ambition and hope. I've always believed there's nothing false about hope, because we still think we'll be able to go ahead, but you never know. I mean, things could change. But we've planned on the basis.
What's the main thing for you? Because I feel like, I feel very privileged to be. I feel like I was there, I was at Woodstock kind of feeling, but I was at the first ResearchEd event, and I'm very proud of that.
Tom. You're one of the consultant surgeons for ResearchEd.
I feel honoured to be part of that. And I've collected. I've got about 25 programs from the different events I've been to.
As do I. Yes, indeed.
Like a total, like a sort of football fan that keeps the match day programs. You've got yours. Oh yeah, look at that.
Some of these will be worth money in a few years' time.
I've got a pile like that.
Okay.
So I want to ask you a slightly deeper question about this, because people are involved in it like you, and I feel like I'm happy to, delighted to be anywhere close to it. But why is it? And what is it about it that makes it so important to people who get involved with it? Why do you think it works so?
First of all, I've got to say here that we blundered upon success. It was successful despite my efforts rather than because of them. But I'm happy to take credit for it now. And I've thought a lot about what it is that made it work in the first place. And honestly, I think there's a few simple things which made it interesting. Number one, we're talking about evidence-informed education, and I think there was an appetite for that. It was bursting to get out. The people were sick to their back teeth of uninformed shamanism and folk magic and folk teaching, and here's what I reckon, and people selling books based on hunches and intuition and just, pop psychology and stuff like that. So I think people have had enough of that, but there's never been a platform for it. I think social media catalyzed it because it enabled us to short circuit the traditional conversational social cultures of the priesthood, where ideas would be given to us like Moses from Mount Sinai. And now teacher could speak unto teacher, and we could talk directly to academics. I think it was also the fact that we were quite democratic. We had teachers speaking and leaders speaking, but also academics and researchers and ministers and people involved in think tanks and charities and MRI operators, and everybody could speak as long as it was an evidence-informed perspective and education. And it's a community. And I realised that we had bubble communities, but also an international community of people who shared the same values. And I flatter myself that a little bit of it is the network of people that I've met along the way, and people that Helene have met along the way, and people like yourselves and so on. That there's a network of people who share many things different, but many things in common. And the thing they have in common is a genuine desire to make things better. And the last thing is non-profit. Nobody makes a buck. I don't get a salary. I don't get a cent out of Research Ed. And because of that, people will contribute. And that's a lovely thing. It's nice to be part of that. I'll never get rich from Research Ed, but there's more to life than money, Tom.
Oh, yes. But I feel like, I think that captures it really well. And I think this thing of that people are looking forward to coming together. And it's the fact that it's there, all the spin-off events and the online versions have been really good. But it's that coming together and then the connecting and moving on and the debates. So, it's great. I don't want to, I could talk to you the whole thing just about Research Ed, but I'm excited that it's coming back. And, I feel like, that you're owed a sort of debt of gratitude for getting it going and being a catalyst, because you need people that can be bothered to get it going. But then it's got a momentum now, and it's got a global thing as well. So well for that, it's brilliant. But let's talk about behaviour. So Emma, I'm going to pass this on to you to get this ball out.
Neat segue, more of like a whiplash. But
Whoa!
A whiplash handover. No,
a song or something in between.
I did have a question about Research Ed, but it'll keep. I'll ask Tom another day about that one.
Sure.
But I hadn't read this until about 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
And I deliberately not read it. Very deliberately not read it.
I've never heard that before. Deliberately not read your book. Okay.
Deliberately not read it. But and then I did read it on actually Sam's recommendation. He said, you need to read this. So I read it. And then I was so stunned because it wasn't the book that I thought it was going to be.
Oh, really? What did you think it was going to be?
Well, I thought it was going to be really secondary. I thought it was going to be.
How dare you? How very dare you?
I thought it was going to be really focused in all of the conversation around exclusions and isolation booths and this, that, and the other. And I read it, and I actually had to kind of like throw it down at one point because I thought I was listening to myself. I was like, oh my goodness! And the thing that jumped out at it for me, really jumped out, and I might be totally wrong here. I might have misread this entirely.
Yeah.
I read that, and what I was reading was really good primary practice.
Fancy that. I'm not too surprised.
No, but
I can't believe there was anything of value in this. I can't believe it. This actually makes sense.
I was labouring under the misapprehension that this was a book about behaviour in secondary schools.
Well, Emma, if I could, well, thank you for puncturing that myth. My background is secondary. Mm-hmm. So you're right, that's always going to be a danger. But I have dedicated my life, like Grasshopper from Kung Fu, to trying to understand behaviour in children, and I guess people in general. And some of the best practice in terms of behaviour management I've ever seen comes from early years, Key Stage 1, and AP, PRU, and special provision. Yeah. And the reason for that is that when you teach the very, very young children, you realise, because life punches you in the face with it, that children don't know how to do stuff.
Yeah.
But basic stuff that we take for granted. This is the curse of expertise, the curse of knowledge. Children don't know how to blow their nose. You've got to teach it to them. So if you're in a kindergarten environment, you've got to show a child how to blow their nose, turn their shoelaces, and how to apologise to someone, and how to wait for 2 minutes, and how to go to the back. Yeah. All these wee social skills. And that's where I learnt loads from. And I realised that essentially it was just a continuum up to secondary, that essentially most of these principles were universal principles, and that a lot of them were just adapted depending on the age group. But I'm really delighted that you thought it was primary relevant, because
I genuinely did, and especially page 100 to like 102, 110. That section on culture, about classroom culture and what you expect from the children. And the bit about originating in necessity, I was like, that is primary practice. We have to run our rooms like this because, like you say, these children don't know how to line up. This is new to them. They don't know how to sit down, to transition from the table to the door to the assembly hall. So this is our bread and butter. And now I'm reading it and I'm thinking, this is primary practice. And it completely blew my mind, to be perfectly honest, because I was...
Well, I'm good. But also, when you look at the early years curriculum, and less so Key Stage 1, but still Key Stage 1, there's a lot of mention about appropriate social developmental milestones.
Yeah.
You don't get that in secondary. There's very little kind of, by the age of 14, they should be able to tie their shoelaces. It's kind of, but it's understood that this is very much an incubator of those behaviours.
Yeah.
And that's why, for my money, if I want to think about behaviour, I would go to early years, Key Stage 1 or AP.
That makes my heart sing, Mr. Bennett. That really does. But the question that it threw up for me...
Oh, there's a question, right, okay.
There is a question, not just an observation.
Lurking in there somewhere.
The question that threw up was around about sort of September time. There's lots of posts on social media about secondary teachers saying, the year 7s are so needy and they're so biddable and they're so quiet and I can't get anything out of them and they behave so well and da-da-da-da. My question is, if that's what's happening in year 7... what happens after that? Where does the kind of the challenging behaviour come from if they come in year 7 and they are the kind of biddable little year 7s?
Well, this is interesting, right? There's this kind of weird, unspoken, sometimes spoken rivalry and tension between the primary and the secondary sector. It's entirely unnecessary, but tribes got a tribe. I get a lot of secondary teachers that say things like, I'm not there to teach them behaviour, I'm there to teach them maths. And I go, boy, are you in the wrong job? Because teaching is a relational process, teaching is a dialogic process, coaching is a dialogic process. You don't just sick up the learning and expect them to do something with it. Sorry about the image. Now, in primary school, there's a far greater tendency to realise that people have to socialise the children into the habits and the routines of the school system. Not enough still, but it's more prominent. Also, primary schools tend to be smaller. Also, primary school practitioners tend to be, they're nicer people in general, I usually find. They're just nicer people. Secondary school teachers have to be a bit harder and more cynical because people throw things at them. But in the primary sector, you've got this kind of much more nurturing environment, much more relational environment. It's usually smaller classes. Everyone knows everyone's name. You don't get the big 2,000 pupil mega schools in primary normally. And you get the kids all day long, so you develop this really intense relationship with them. Kids go from that type of environment, suddenly, boom, they see 15 teachers in a week. And they see them for very short periods of time. And every room's got different cultural expectations. And year 7 for many people is a real shock because they've been dropped from warm, soothing water into very, very cold water indeed. And the children, for a while, think to themselves, I'll just do what I've always done. And they're often quite compliant, they're often quite teacher-pleasing and so on. And then they realise a lot of the teachers in secondary school, not always, I'm not trying to generalise here, but they let them away with stuff that they didn't before because the teachers in secondary didn't know what the expectations of the feeder school were. So the kid eventually starts thinking, hang on, I don't have to do this anymore. I don't have to double underline the first paragraph because nobody seems to care if I do it or not. So maybe I won't do it, or maybe I won't do the work. And it's true. You see their books, and you see the work just kind of go off a cliff, which is why you look at a through school, and they usually don't suffer this problem. And what good schools do is they have this kind of Venn diagram of year 5, 6, and 7, where teachers and staff from both schools do lots of visits, and sometimes they even start the curriculum at the end of year 6, and sometimes they'll do a bit of year 6 and year 7. And I've seen some wonderful experiments going on to try to get around this. But it's basically...
Is it anything to do with puberty, like the kind of, in my experience, like in schools with not good systems when I was a younger teacher, for sure, year 8, year 9 was pretty tough, and there was a kind of students who are more likely to start pushing the boundaries because they can, obviously. They start to sort of think they're developing a kind of agency. There's a natural adolescence period. I mean, to what extent do you feel that is a driver?
Well, there's an old saying, isn't there, that culture eats strategy for breakfast. Well, biology eats culture for breakfast, and adolescence isn't just a ticking time bomb. It's a nuclear hand grenade that goes off inside people's heads and in their bodies. So developmentally, you're absolutely right. There's lots of things which are concomitant with that. So, for example, the two main things that happen at the adolescent phase, which are relevant to this conversation, is there's an enormous spike in conformity. This is the weirdest thing, right? Kids become super conformist. Not because they want to be robots, because they want to fit in with their peer groups. They don't want to stand out. They want to be accepted. Why? Because they've got this emergent sense of who they are, and they feel very vulnerable, and they feel very exposed. And also they become more impulsive. The impulsivity spikes in the adolescent phase too. It's just a biochemical thing. And children lose, to some extent, the capacity to attach present circumstances with future outcomes. So they become more kind of reckless and passionate, and also they start to notice one another in a more prurient sense. And all of a sudden, pleasing the teacher becomes less important. We know, for example, that peer approval matters far more than adult approval in the adolescent phase. I mean, mileage varies, but as a cohort.
I love that phrase you use on page 110 about the centrifuge. I have read this book.
Good. You've gone from, I don't want to read this book, I'm choosing not to. I'm
a very thorough student, Mr. Bennett.
Thank you very much.
To do something else. But you describe it as the centrifuge of peer pressure, which I think is an absolutely brilliant way of describing it. Pardon?
Had you forgotten that you'd use that phrase? Because that's good.
No, I was admiring it from afar, thinking, what a lovely
Yeah, but maybe that is one of the things that we don't necessarily have to deal with at primary, and why the approach in primary can be so different, because we're not battling that centrifugal beast that you are in secondary.
It's definitely still there, though. When my wee girl came home a couple of years ago, she's 7 now. I remember she came home a few years ago asking for Smiggle, right?
I could remortgage my house.
Absolutely, right? The Smiggle is basically stationery that smells of strawberries, and you add a 0 on at the end in terms of the price. That's the only difference I can discern. And then she didn't suddenly wake up one morning thinking, I wish my stationery to smell like raspberries. She saw somebody else with it. So it's a big pool. Pester power is still a thing in the pre-adolescent phase. It just gets more pronounced in the adolescent phase.
Can I ask you, Tom, because you're involved with this at so many levels, so you have a sort of micro kind of contact with schools and doing training and talking to individual teachers, and then you also have a policy thing. I mean, you have this thing. How comfortable are you with this whole thing of being the behaviour czar and that whole thing? Because every time, are you sort of like, do you wish you weren't, or is it something you wear with pride? I mean, what's your view of that? Because it's an amazing thing. You are like kind of the central. Every time there's a behaviour debate, the government says something, and you're thinking, they didn't even tell you about it, and suddenly you have to represent behaviour on a national level.
Listen, Tom.
How do you cope with that?
Yeah. I know what you mean. It's a bit of a double-edged sword at times, because number one, when I was teaching, I wanted to get better at behaviour. I started to write about it, and when you're a writer, you want an audience. And all of a sudden, I found that you found this to yourself. That all of a sudden, people of influence are reading you. You think, oh, that's amazing. And then they say to you, we want you to help us with these big projects. And you go, this is my dream come true. A teacher practitioner being invited to some extent to try to influence things to make it better for other teacher practitioners. And, to some extent, I could never be unhappy about that, because that's what you've always wanted. And I still feel like that. And while sometimes the czar title is a bit of a double-edged sword, because I don't actually have any power, I can't make anything happen. I can only advise, but it's an independent role. And let's face it, who doesn't want to be called a czar? I mean, that's amazing. Let's get real here. Carve it on my tomb, which should be like Napoleon's. And so I really enjoy that. I mean, it's an honour to be asked to work with people in this respect. And often, you get some stick occasionally. This is the drawback. You get some stick from people saying, look at you, working with the filthy scum that they are, and I think to myself, which government do you want me to work with? Because there's only one just now. Which Department for Education, perhaps the alternate dimension, Marvel multiverse one, where the people you like are in charge. because that ain't happening here. You know, I'll work with whoever's in charge if I'm asked to influence something to do with education, and I'm bloody honoured to do so, and I'm delighted to do so.
I think it's a good attitude. Do you feel like things are getting better then? Because I feel like there's a whole debate. Sometimes behaviour's in crisis, and sometimes, you know, it's the debate. It gets so unnuanced. But do you see, because of all the thinking and all the effort people are putting into systems, and my experience is that I see very few sort of catastrophic behaviour scenarios, but I see quite a lot of sort of teachers, struggling within the systems, which is quite good. But what's your sense of that? It's the sort of general state of things.
This is a question I've been asking myself for about 12 years. Is behaviour getting better or worse? It's impossible to accurately or scientifically validate that question, to answer that question another way, simply because the data we've got changes from year to year. So, for instance, you can't go by Ofsted behavioural reports simply because I don't trust their judgment when it comes to evaluating a school's behaviour. I don't. I mean, I've got more trust now, but that's only because they've listened to me. But it used to just be, I know, but it used to be that the inspectors would come and they would have very strong predetermined understandings of a school. And they would speak to about 5 kids and look at 15 questionnaires from 14 completely barmy parents. And they would form their judgment. I mean, bollocks to that. What you need to do to get under the bonnet is to look at habits and routines and things that people are doing without being asked. And do people understand where the systems are and how is it enacted and how is it trained? So there's that. I think what's better now, that we know is better, is that in the bad old days, like the 70s or the 80s, you would get some real sink estate schools, where the kids were literally running riot before HMI. And now that's gone because HMI exists, and now those schools tend to get shut. So there's a certain bar of improvement. I genuinely think that in the last, say, 6 years, and this is non-scientific, this is anecdata here, that schools are starting to think a lot more about routines and systems and so on. Some of it has been catalysed by some of my work, but some of it has been catalysed by the work of lots and lots of other people, like, for instance, like Sam Strickland, and the Michaela schools and the Dixon Trinity schools and some of the better art schools and so on, that are doing it and actually making it happen. And because of social media, people are no longer scared of saying, look what we're doing, we can do these things. And other people go, that's fantastic. I'd like some of that too. But the training in it is still dreadful. That's the big problem, I would say.
Just thinking with your national overview of behaviour. I was talking to Catherine Morgan the other day, who's instantly making her debut at Research Ed London. So there you go.
We should call it New Faces.
Pardon?
We should call the event New Faces. Anyway,
but we were talking about what do you think needs to happen, or what could happen at a societal level to improve behaviour in schools? Is there anything that you think needs to happen there?
Oh, at a societal level. Well, I mean, if I've got a magic wand here, I would like to change human nature to make it more altruistic and less selfish. Is that what you mean?
No, we were just discussing.
People misbehave because we have different desires, because we compete for resources, and because we've got different understanding of what the good life is, to paraphrase Aristotle. And because of that, people compete. People cooperate when they willingly delegate some of their freedom in order to achieve more security but more opportunity. That's more of a kind of a political point than anything else. But it's one that I'm wedded to. Human nature doesn't change, but the systems in which they operate can change. So I suspect that one of the ways in which we could make behaviour better in schools via the societal route would be for people to understand that all children need a thorough socialisation in being a flourishing member of a flourishing community. Now, 95% of parents understand this and do their bloody best. But because of the fracturing of things like the extended families and so on, that used to be the norm paradigm, there's been a lot of disintegration of how parenting skills are passed on. And, people still do their best and try their best. But there's a lot of people like me and my wife, whose parents are miles and miles and miles away and don't live with nearby family, who basically had to work out to be parents for ourselves and don't have lots of support mechanisms and so on. And in those types of circumstances, you do see a bit of fragmentation and people doing their best and struggling. So, for instance, look at mobile phones, is a perfect example. I see loads and loads of parents who give mobile phones to primary age children. which smartphones with no security protocols on them. And I just think, well, that's fascinatingly stupid of you.
Yeah.
But,
exactly. They don't have the tools to say no to that, or do they?
Yeah. So they literally don't know in the first place this is a bad idea. They think, oh, all the kids have got them, so they should probably have them. Because it's nice to give in to your kids. Everyone does. But as you say, it's also there's a behavioural thing there. It's so easy to give in to children. I do it. But then I have to go back and read my book and remind myself not to.
You bought the Smiggle, didn't you? You bought the Smiggle.
I bought shares in Smiggle.
I don't know because my kids are older. So I think it's interesting. One of the things I was going to ask you is this, because I feel lots of really interesting commentary around sort of post-COVID and catch up, and some people are amping up the kind of. I literally saw a head teacher or an ex-head teacher actually saying, "Our kids are traumatized. We need this," and I'm thinking, I'm not seeing loads of traumatized kids. I'm seeing lots of kids who are quite happy to be back at school. But do you feel like there's one sort of school of thought which is let's look at curriculum, teaching and learning, knowledge, reading, and that's the way. And others are saying, let's put resources into social care, wraparound and social mental health sort of services, that kind of thing. And sometimes these things are presented as kind of opposites. What's your sense of that? Kind of where we should be putting.
Well, because I'm not actually in government, or am I? I've got the liberty of saying we should throw money at everything. That's the beauty. When you're in opposition, you can say more money for everything, and when you've actually got the money, you think, "Hang on, this isn't my money." But I mean, so yes, I believe in wraparound care. I think schools need to have more integrated inclusion units. They need to have more members of staff who are both trained teachers and also trained pastorally and therapeutically to do the hard work with the more challenging children, but in school in a nurturing environment. So I believe in all that. But what I think is really interesting with the COVID situation is that people use COVID's a magic mirror, right? People look into the magic mirror and see whatever they want to see. And people use COVID and say, COVID has proven that people should do exactly what I've always said they should do. So for example, the people who thought to get rid of exams have said, look, get rid of exams. And the people who thought that, that children, I don't know, all need a therapist, still think children need a therapist. And what I think is fascinating is this. The vast majority of children had an unpleasant, vast majority of children had a mixture of an unpleasant time and maybe a quite nice time bonding with their parents. And it was difficult at times, and some bits were better, some bits were worse, and so on. A small percentage of children have been kept in toxic environments where they've been exposed to abuse and neglect. And a vast majority of children were delighted to get back to school because they find enormous meaning and purpose in being at school. It's their social and peer group. They miss their friends. And a lot of children let's not forget, a lot of children like teaching and school far more than we think. And it's a great place for them. It's a safe place for them. And parents are bloody happy to see them back at school. Now, the idea that every child is traumatized, or most children are traumatized, or we need to set up enormous trauma centres and trauma tents and so on, is an enormous insult to the concept of trauma and the children that go through trauma and people that live with trauma. And people throw about this word as if they know what it means, and they don't know what it means. Children have had a difficult time. You know what? Children are pretty resilient as well. So what we do is we say to children who come back from school, we're so happy to see you. We missed you. We're glad to have you back. Let's do some bloody great learning. Boom, let's go. And I would avoid the kind of catch-up conversation. Just say, let's go, let's start learning. But keep your eye open for the children who've had difficulties and difficult times, and the staff members too, and people who've been through bereavement and loss and trauma and difficulty and long COVID, and make sure that there are some support mechanisms for them there, even if it's just some pastoral care or a chaplain or someone there to talk to or something like that.
That makes sense to me. I mean, I agree with you. So, Emma, what's your sense of it? Were your kids traumatised?
No,
what a question, Tom. I can't believe
they've gone, but the thing that they missed most of all was their teacher, because the relationship at primary, that primary practitioner in their lives is a huge part of their life. They see them potentially more than they see their parent, and there was a real sense of loss for the first few weeks that they couldn't check in with that person. And the absolute joy when they went back to school. I mean, my youngest is only in foundation stage, but when he went back in the October, when we went back and then we had that, he turned around to me and he genuinely said this. He said, "This is the best day of my life." When he went back to school. And I was just thinking, that is absolutely amazing, and just shows you what a huge part of a child's life experience going to school is. And those people are so important.
Absolutely. I mean, as I say, we find, I mean, this is going back to Maslow here, but we find an enormous amount of meaning, structure, purpose, and status in our relationships with others. Well, who are the people that children interact with, particularly in the primary phase? It's a lot of it's a third of their life is with their peers and with their teacher. It's a surrogate parent in some ways, and children frequently behave better for their teacher than they do for their parents because they know they can't push the boundaries quite as much. Mm-hmm. We hope that anyway.
Yeah, so mine aren't traumatised.
Yeah.
I want to ask you another thing, like, because we talk about running the room, and there's so many things in here. There's so many kind of nuggets. I was just earlier. I was reading the chapter about scripting, and there were some samples from Dixon's and stuff, and there's some real sort of like fine-grained practical things that you can do to run a room, and I love all that. When you work with teachers who will say to you, "I'm struggling with a class," or "I've got this problem," do you find there are some really common issues that they're saying to you, like some hot things we just almost predict they're going to come up with because these are the standard ones?
Oh God, yeah. I mean, I remember when I used to write for the TES, and I was their behaviour agony uncle. That was my first title. Then guru, and then czar. I'm waiting for knight next or something. And what I found was that people would send the same problems in over and over and over again. It was always the same stuff. It was the most common one was low-level disruption. The second most common problem was I'm not getting supported by my line manager. Third most common problem was I feel like I want to give up. It's that kind of thing. And I realised very quickly that there was only about 10 or 20 things which commonly went wrong a lot for most teachers. Obviously, there are exceptions, but for most people, it's somebody's late, someone's forgotten the book, someone doesn't have equipment, someone told someone to fuck off, or whatever. Sorry, bleep that out. And there was the same things over and over again. So I realised that what you could do quite easily was you could script a response in advance of the behaviour happening. And what I also found really interesting was that this isn't a novelty. In training and education, many fields have discovered this. So, for example, if you join the army, before you go into live battlefields, you will be trained using live ammunition. You'll have real bullets flying over your head, so that the first time you encounter a bullet isn't on the battlefield when you might just have a heart attack. So you get used to it, so you become familiarized and desensitized to the overstimulus of something as threatening as that. So this is something that many fields have already done, that you train people for the job before they have to do the job. Airline pilots doing 10,000 hours of flight simulator before they get into a 747, or doing 10,000 hours or whatever, however many hours, in smaller planes. Surgeons practicing on cadavers before they do real surgery. I mean, practicing before you do the real thing is such a common thing in education, it's barely worth mentioning. Yet in teaching, we don't do that. Or some people do, but it's not really a thing, which is why I think scripting is such a useful thing to do, because you're giving somebody a skeleton, a launch pad, a climbing frame of what other people have done and found quite useful in the past, so that eventually, a bit like learning your scales and your arpeggios, you can start to play jazz with the wisdom of people who've preceded you, but you've got that wisdom to inform your practice, rather than having to invent the wheel every single time a cohort comes through, a new generation of teacher comes through, which is madness. And
yeah, it's crazy.
Do you think it's because when behaviour's working well, you don't see it, and that's why it's so hard to kind of articulate why it's working well, and that you only need to address it when it's going wrong, and that's why it doesn't necessarily get modelled or talked about or articulated in the way that it should? Because if you're watching an experienced teacher who's really effective, there isn't the behaviour to necessarily watch a lot of the time.
It is a metaphysical and perhaps an ontological error, obviously. Right. The reason why is that people attribute behaviour to some kind of innate sense of goodness about a person, like it's a gift which is given by the fairies in Sleeping Beauty at birth, in the cradle. People are either good or they're bad, and people forget that behaviour is learned. that the rituals and the traditions and the routines and the norms of our behaviour are all learned. Very little bit of our behaviour is completely intuitive. It's mostly ritualised and taught. And what you find is that when people see good behaviour in a child, they say that's a good child. Well, what they mean is that child has had experiences to habituate them into these forms of behaviour. And frequently you'll get a school with lots and lots of really, great, well-behaved children. And it might be a primary school with 40 kids in the Cotswolds, and the behaviour is immaculate, and the kids are just lovely. And the mistake that many people make in that circumstance is we're really great at behaviour. When actually what you are is you're the recipient of multiple members of the Lucky Sperm Club, which is okay. And I'm delighted. I wish everyone had those advantages, but don't pat yourself in the back and say, look at the great work we did. And this is why many schools in the independent sector can get away with being rubbish at behaviour. And I've worked with lots of schools in the independent sector, and I say to them, what do you do to manage behaviour? And they kind of look at me as if I've just asked them something. I don't know.
You don't have to worry, yeah.
Yeah, we caught some smoking pot last week. That's about it.
I think it's interesting when, I think one of the things is that there are certain things which are, it's a bit like, momentum and sustaining. So going into a school with, like one of the, I've shared this, when I went to be the head of the grammar school in Chelmsford, one of the things I learned, which just blew me away, was the teacher's expectations of the students in terms of their work and their homework was so astronomical. I'd never seen it before. Like you really set that amount of work to do over the weekend, and the students would do like a ton of German practice overnight for tomorrow's lesson, and no one batted an eyelid. And it was just incredible. But that's because that was already there. That was the culture. It was totally just sustained. Every new teacher who came in just did that too, and the students expected it, and it was just normal. And so it's only when you have to sort of reach to get to that it seems like you have to make this almighty effort.
Yes.
So it's like changing cultures is so hard, isn't it?
Well, there's a line, one of my favourite lines from Camus, where he says, in the end, you could get used to anything. And it's absolutely true. Human beings are incredibly flexible. People endured Belfast and Beirut at the height of the Troubles and the terrors. People get used to it. I've worked with some teachers in Burkina Faso, where some of the children had to walk 15 miles to get to school, on a daily basis. And when they got there was, one teacher if they were lucky, and barely any classrooms. And people can get used to so much stuff, and people can learn to live with difficulty, but also they can learn to exceed circumstances that other people just think they can't. Human nature is demonic and angelic, and it's inspirational in many, many ways in terms of what people are capable of when they put their minds to it. But as you say, with other people, it requires vast oceans of determination and willpower on the person who's trying to change the behaviours of other people, because you yourself have to be more resolute than they ever will be. You are the coach, and of course the coach can't stop.
Do you get frustrated? I mean,
always.
One of the things that I have to sort of like coach myself out of it, because I get so enraged by this, which is when
let it out, Tom. Let it out.
People who've never had to do it criticise schools who have strict behaviour.
Here we go.
And are wishing them to have a soft, lovely, fluffy policy, but they have never run a school or had to. I mean, I just could go mental about it. So how do you feel about that kind of discussion about that, strict schools?
You're pressing one of my triggers here. That. you cheeky little monkey here. Yeah, of course I do. It drives me mad when people who know bugger all about it talk as if they do know about it. And it wouldn't matter. It wouldn't matter to me if sometimes they didn't have influence, and they form think tanks, and they form, select committees, and they sometimes have influence over schools, either through things like governorships, or because they end up becoming the leaders of MATs, or they become Ofsted inspectors. There's a lot of people in the system who don't know how to manage the behaviour of challenging children. And the reason for that is because there's no mechanism to prevent people who are rubbish at managing behaviour, or who have never experienced it in the slightest. There's no mechanism for preventing these people from getting into positions of authority over people that do have to manage behaviour. So if you go to a school, and you'll sometimes find members of SLT who couldn't manage a challenging class, but who are advising new teachers how to manage a challenging class. And I mean, at least that is usually well meant. At least they're trying to do their best. But they'll frequently come up with things. I remember a story I often tell is that I was told in my first few weeks of teaching with a really challenging class, they said to me, have you ever thought about putting the most challenging student in front of the lesson and putting her in charge of the lesson? And I went, no, that hadn't really occurred to me, but give it a try. So I put this, her name was Katie, right? And I've forgiven her by now, or have I? And I put her in charge of the class, and she spent about 40 minutes doing a Shrek impression of me. You know, hello, donkey, and so on. And I remember sitting in the back of the class, just humiliated. What am I doing? And the boy next to me, a really nice boy, said, "Sir, what are you doing?" And I said, "I don't know. I've no idea." I went back and got this was one of my mentors. I got up the next day, and he said, "How did it go?" And I said, "It didn't go well. It didn't go well, if I'm honest." And he said, "Oh, really?" And I said, "What happened when you did it?" And he said, "Oh, I don't know. I've never done it." You know, and you told me to do it. And this is what education is like, when people can just put a finger in the air and say, "I'll give that a try, who knows?" And that's why I started research it, because I'm sick to the back teeth of that kind of rubbish.
I'm just thinking, because I work with loads of early career teachers all the time. And I'm just thinking, if you only had like 30 seconds to just give them a few quick wins.
Get out! No,
because I remember when I was training, the best piece of advice that my mentor gave me was, don't rely on force of personality. Lean on the behaviour system in your school to do the heavy lifting, because you will be exhausted. And I took that with me all the way through. And then my NQT year, my head teacher said, never shout, because you've got nowhere to go after that. So those two pieces of advice have served me really well. Don't rely on force of personality, lean on your system, and don't shout, because you've got nowhere to go. So what would be your kind of quick wins? And I have to credit Nimish Lad with this question, because he asked me to ask you.
Really? Right, okay. So I've got 30 seconds, have I? Okay, so first of all, I would say...
No, you can have as long as you want, but imagine you had like...
What is the question, Emma? I don't even know what I'm answering now, because apparently I've got as long as I like. So in that case, I was put through a 6-week induction process.
Okay, well, I'll stick to what I was going to do. I would insist on what I originally said.
I don't even know who you are anymore. Who are you? Right, so I've got 30 seconds. So I say, well, young Padawan, what a career choice you've made. First thing you need to do, and I would lead in and say, first thing you need to do is buy Tom Bennett's Running the Room, available for $14.99 from John Catt Publishing. And then with the last 15 seconds, I would say, if you've got any money left, I would buy Tom Bennett's Running the Room Companion at £12.99, far more reasonable. Get them together, you can get £2. I'm kidding. Right, the real advice, I would say, children hate boundaries. Children crave boundaries. You need to be the one who builds the boundaries. So teach them how to behave, because they don't know how to behave. They're relying on you to be a grown-up, and they need an adult. And it doesn't matter sometimes if it feels tough, and it will feel tough. But do it anyway, because they need you. Your job is important, and it's not going to be easy, but it's incredibly valuable. That's what I would say.
That's beautiful. I tell you what,
that was nicer than buying my book, I think.
I wish you'd been around in about 1994, when I was being fried by my year 9s, and I was thinking, what the hell am I supposed to do?
Yeah, absolutely. 1994, I just arrived in London with my knapsack in my bag, bartending in Soho. So I wouldn't have been much use to you then, if I'm honest, but I could have been in my time.
I think it's brilliant. I mean, I actually love the fact that we are starting to have this dialogue, and I feel like it's always like it's just starting, but I feel like these discussions that are there, the resourcing, the fact that you've got the books, and the fact that you're available, and I mean, all this is like with this hub system and more messages, more sources of people saying, look, this is how to do it. I think that's absolutely fantastic, and I actually think you're someone who I think really does a good job of flying the flag for this, because like today I had an email from a head teacher I used to work closely to when I was in Islington, and he said to me, "Oh, it's great how you've gone on since blah blah blah." And I actually think, no, he's one of the best head teachers I've ever met, and I actually feel like, no, everything I've done since then is I've just been overcompensating for the fact that I can't do what you do. Like, your school is amazing, and the way that he ran his school, with the behaviour was impeccable, the standards are incredible, and I just think, no, you are the person. People like you, you're really good at making that point, that kind of, frontline stuff really matters, and people who do it really need maximum support. Yeah.
I start every single one of my training, and anything I do with any teacher, I start off by saying thank you to them for still doing it, because it's hard, it's wearing and it's dispiriting. I love teaching, but it grinds you to the ground. And if people don't do it, then nothing we say matters. And I'm a big believer in trying to be where the universe needs you to be, and I feel like I'm doing some good, and I hope I am. I do try, and I don't overestimate what I do. I don't think it's changing the world, but I think it's helping the small wee bit right in front of me, and that's all that any of us can do. But I think that teachers and leaders often forget just how important what they're doing is. And you just have to think back to your own childhood and the teachers who made a difference to you, and you think, yeah, they do matter. Sometimes they don't matter at all, but they're always a link in the chain of other people's lives, and that's an enormous responsibility.
No, it is. Well, I mean, honestly, I think we have to wrap it up now because time is up. But it's been a real
don't go.
I love hearing you talk. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure. A real honour to talk to you again. Thank you very much for having me on eventually. And really, really nice to meet you, Emma. And I'll see you, Ross, again.
And you. Yeah. It's been an absolute pleasure. And I absolutely love that book.
What a great book. That book doesn't look like it's even opened. That spine is unsullied.
You will actually find it's full of writing, because
yes,
I've actually written in it.
Fabulous.
Where do you think I got my quotes from?
Yeah. And we'll see you at Research Ed in September. Looking forward to it.
Wait. Fingers crossed, but I can't wait for the face-to-face again. So I'll see you there, guys.
Thanks, Tom. Thank you.
And thanks, everyone, for joining us for this episode. Mind the Gap, making education work across the globe, with me and Emma and Tom today. Tom and Tom. See you all in the next episode. Thank you.